Hey, legends. Welcome to another episode of Hey You Get a Real Fucking Job. On today's episode, we got, a guy who's done a job I've been interested in and is doing a job I've been interested in, and that is Michael Zwick. Now, Michael is joining us from Orlando. He is the president of Assets International. And Assets International is a private investigation agency that specializes in the world of inheritances. They help heirs find what they're entitled to and also help track down missing heirs. They've been in business for close to 22 years now and have united heirs worldwide with over $160 million. And I'm thinking, you know what? I got to have somebody that's got to be leaving me some money somewhere. So I may be putting Michael to work after this. But hey, you know what? On that note, Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Reg. It's great to be here with you and the legends.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Listen, you know what? Before I had, met you a few weeks ago, I had never heard of an inheritance private investigator, somebody that goes out and finds people who are looking for money. With your background, now I don't know if I mentioned you were a lawyer prior to, and you still hold your license, but you're normally looking probably from what we look at lawyers. You're looking for people to give you money at the end of the day. You're not looking for people to find to give them money. So that's awesome, but like I said, I'd never heard of it. So why don't we dive into it? Why don't you, let the listeners know what is it that as a PI you do to find heirs?
Okay, so yes, as you said, I do a law license. I used to practice law, and that really helps me out because I understand some of the legal issues that come up. We have to review a lot of court documents. So typically, in a missing heir case, a an executor or attorney will call us and say, "Hey, I'm handling this estate. I can't find this particular heir, or I can't find any heirs. I don't know who any of the heirs are." We also get those types of calls from people who want to buy real estate, and they know that the owner of the house has passed away, but they don't know who the heirs are to make an offer.
Okay.
So, it all boils down to, at the end of the day, us reaching out to the heirs when we find them and saying, "Hey, great news! We found something you're entitled to, some valuable amount of money. And in exchange for a percentage, we'll not only tell you where it is, but we'll also do all the work to get it for you." Now, obviously, there's a lot of work that goes into finding those heirs because we sometimes are working with very little information. So sometimes we really have to really flesh out the family tree. We have to, as I say, go up the tree to come down.
Right.
Because, for example, just say John Smith is the person who's passed away. And obviously, if we know that John had a son or daughter, we just go look for them. But if John, say, was an only child and so doesn't have siblings, so it's John's aunts and uncles or cousins or their children who will inherit. So we kind of got to go up the family tree to find the grandparents, who the grandparents were, and then come back down to find the aunts and uncles and the cousins and their descendants, who would be the first cousins once removed. So there's no one way we handle a case. There's genealogy, there's going through court documents, there's sometimes I'm going to a cemetery
Right.
to look around and see who's buried next to whom, so I can maybe piece together things. So it's a lot of doing a puzzle.
Yeah, and I can imagine there'd be lots of different roads that you travel down, and I would assume too you must run into some issues if heirs are possibly across international borders. You are in the U.S., but you do worldwide, so I'm assuming there's got to be some legalities that way when you're reaching out to try and find people in other countries, possibly.
Yeah, so there certainly are. Different countries, for example, have different rules on the information they make available, whether it's death records, death certificates, census records, court records. Different countries have different rules, and some countries, like United States, is a pretty open country in terms of that stuff. Most court records, you can literally walk into a courthouse and say, "Hey, can I see this probate file?" and they'll hand it to you to look at. In other countries, you have to have a power of attorney from someone who is authorizing you. So it definitely varies from place to place. We've built up a really good network, some of which are colleagues of ours that do what we do, but in other countries, and we'll work with them sometimes to locate people, and as well as to get through records that we need.
Right. Now, you mentioned colleagues of yours in other countries. So is this a fairly widespread um, career, I guess, for lack of a better term? Because, like I said, I'd never heard of it before. Private investigation, yes, I've heard. So is heir, finding, is that kind of a niche within the private investigation field?
Yeah, very much so. When people hear I'm a private investigator, they automatically assume that I'm, driving some cool sports car, or chasing cheating husbands at 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
Uh, Truth be told, I drive a minivan. I don't carry a weapon. I don't. I do own one Hawaiian shirt. For
Right.
people of a certain age will get that reference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but no, I'm not doing the typical private investigator work. It's fun. I'm actually studying right now for a licensing exam in one particular state, and it's a pretty extensive exam in terms of everything. What a private investigator needs to know. There's nothing to do with finding missing heirs or finding inheritance assets on the exam, because it is such a small part of the private investigator world.
Right. And why did you choose this area? Why aren't you chasing down those cheating husbands and the insurance fraud and that? What led you to this specific niche?
So I was practicing law in the starting the mid '90s until the early 2000s, and then an old friend of mine stumbled upon what's called unclaimed property. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but I'll explain it for the
Sure.
legends out there who don't know what it is.
Yeah.
So in American law, as well as in some Canadian provinces and certain other countries, if an asset that is in the possession of another party is dormant for a certain period of time, say a bank account, where the owner of the bank account is the individual, but the bank holds the money,
Right.
or stock, pensions, insurance, life insurance, whatever the case might be. If that owner doesn't have contact with that other party for a certain period of time, that other party, the bank, the insurance company, whatever, has to turn over those assets to the state, or in Canadians' case, the province, to hold as unclaimed property.
Okay.
So in America, for example, the 50 states plus DC are sitting on about 60 to 70 billion dollars of unclaimed property.
Wow.
So when I was practicing law a number of years ago, an old friend of mine reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's this unclaimed property. Why don't we start a little business where we find the owners and tell them they got money coming to them and do the work for them, and then we would get a percentage." So we started that business, and then after a while, we realized that finding missing heirs was a natural offshoot. It's the same exact work. We're starting by finding a sum of money or an asset, and then we're going to track down the people who are entitled to it, and then bring them together. So it's just kind of a natural offshoot of what we were already doing.
Right. Now, when you say the people who are entitled to it, how do you make that determination? Like, I'm assuming these people are not in a will. Maybe there was no will. How do you, or if they are, let's say they've passed on, depending on how long it's been. How do you make the determination as to who is, who gets the inheritance?
So going back to the cases where someone calls us and says, "I've got inheritance, I've got to pay it to a particular person," so that we just say, "Okay, tell us all you can about this particular person, such as name, date of birth, where they've lived," and then we track down. If it's more of an open case where the instance, for example, sorry, the case of the someone wants to buy a house and they don't know who the
Right.
heirs are. So in that case, if there's been a probate estate open, which there probably has, but if there is, that will hopefully list people. But if not, that's where we start digging into things. We might start by ordering, say, the death certificate. We might look to see if there's been any other court cases. We have a case going on right now out of San Diego where the person who owned the house passed away, and a real estate investor wants to buy it. So I found that the person, this owner, had a divorce case 40 years ago. So we've ordered the divorce case to see whether there were minor children listed in the
Right.
divorce proceeding. If not, we already have as a backup. We found the names of his siblings and their children. because we found out from death certificate the decedent's parents' names, because every death certificate should list the parents' names.
Right.
So we use that to then go out on, like I said, flesh out that family tree.
Right. Okay. And in the case where, let's say, there are siblings, nobody's named, how do you decide which sibling gets it? Do you say, okay, you know what, you split it down the middle, we flip a coin? Like, what kind of decisions go into that sort of?
So there, every state, at least in America, I can't speak for other countries, but I'm pretty sure there is a formula that every state has, and it does vary somewhat.
Right.
But in the case where someone has died and doesn't have a wife, doesn't have a wife or husband, doesn't have children, and does have siblings, it's and didn't leave a will. Obviously,
Yeah.
if there's a will, the will controls.
Right.
If there's no will, state laws very specifically will say, here's who inherits what percentage.
Oh, okay.
If so, it doesn't. You know, that basically. I'm sorry. That's just basically the
Yeah.
answer to the question. Is
Yeah.
state law will dictate who inherits what.
Okay. Okay. Huh, that's interesting. So take me back to your law days. You were a criminal defense lawyer, is that correct?
Criminal defense, civil litigation, bankruptcy. Yeah.
Right. So you decided to, did you start Assets International and keep practicing law, or did you just give one up and dive both feet into the PI world? How did that work?
No, it was about 2 or 3 years that I was building Assets International. First, my partners and I were doing it. My partner who brought on, he brought on another guy because we needed someone who had much more organizational mindset. That's not my forte. So we each had our kind of a silo. The guy who started, he's a sales guy. I was more the analytical research and doing legal issues. And then we have my partner Avram, who's the operations guys, making sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing and organizing everything. So for about 2 years, each of us had our day job. I had my law practice. One had a videography business. The other one was a teacher.
Right.
After about 2 years, we realized we were onto something, and we then each, stopped our day job or day business.
Right.
I was also around the time I was getting married, and I was working insane hours. And my wife said to me, is this what's going to be like when we're married? You're going to be at the office every night till 10, 11 o'clock. The irony is I'm now the one who keeps much more conventional hours. She's the one who works for herself, and she burns the midnight oil
Right.
while I'm fast asleep.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's interesting you brought that up, because that's a question I was going to ask. So as a lawyer, right? And I can't speak for, but most people assume lawyers make a pretty decent living. So you say, you're about to get married. Was the wife on board with, you changing careers and kind of going into, a fairly new field? You're still kind of testing the waters. Was she okay with that, or was there a little bit of nerves behind that?
No, she was, partly because by the time I closed the law practice, sorry for the dogs in the
That's
background.
fine.
By the time I closed the law practice, that and my business at Assets International were pretty much neck and neck in terms of the revenue.
So fairly established.
And Assets International had the more upward trajectory.
Right.
But it was also, she comes from an entrepreneurial home. Her father was an entrepreneur for many years. She has her own entrepreneurial mindset,
Right.
and I think she also looked at it of. We never really discussed it, but I'm assuming that she also had the assumption that we didn't have kids. I already had a house with a pretty low mortgage payment,
Yeah.
and worst case scenario, I could always go back to law.
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't like I was giving up my law license. I still, I kept it.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes it a little easier, I guess, when you have something you can fall back on, just in case, right? But
Yeah.
it sounded like you were pretty established and planned on moving forward with it.
Plus, also, there's the minds. I think we're we it was the young, relatively young and in love and stupid.
Right.
That might have played a part too.
Yeah. But that's the best time to do it, right? When you can blame, hey, I was young and stupid, right? Now I know better. So, and what about friends and family? What were their thoughts on when you went ahead with this profession?
So my father, who is a CPA and is rather conservative, he did question it and say, is this really something you think that is going to be stable? And I said, I think so. I want to give it a try.
Yeah.
I can't say I really discussed it with many other people. I just did it.
No. Yeah. And you know what? I'm finding that more when I speak to entrepreneurs is a lot of them they don't really discuss it a lot, and it's usually because you know what, we're of a different mindset. Those other people really don't understand. Why would you not want to be a lawyer? Shit, you're told in school, get one of those jobs, doctor, lawyer, dentist, whatever it is. So why would you kind of pack that in? So, but I'm finding that more and more that people are more keeping it to the chest, so to speak. So they can't have those people, like the title of my podcast, right? Looking at them and say, hey, you know what, Mike, come on, go get a real fucking job. Like, what are you doing, sort of things. So,
Yeah.
um, so I know it may not have a typical day, but walk me through, right? What's a typical day in the life of a PI who's looking for an heir look like? Like, how's that work?
Well, I can't speak for any any other.
Right.
Yeah, I'm an early riser. I'm usually up around 5 a.m.
Yeah.
Usually, I do some stuff around the house. I go to prayer services, come home, and then after that, if I don't have to drive the kids, some days I have to drive the kids to school, and I'm
Right.
back sitting down in front of my desk at 9:15 or so. Other days, I'm sitting down by 7:45, and a lot of our stuff, my work and my staff's work, is we're working from our homes and in our
Okay.
front of our computers.
Right.
The joke was a few years ago, we had a general liability insurance carrier, just to cover basic stuff. And the company one day sends a notice, said, we can't cover you anymore. So why not? They said, we don't cover private investigator agencies. And I said, we're really more like an accounting firm. I
Yeah.
said,
Right.
we're like sitting in front of our computers and phones all day. I said,
Yeah.
yeah, I might go to a client meeting. I said, I don't carry a gun. We're not doing surveillance. We're not doing personal protection.
Right.
I said, I'll do whatever riders you want. And they said, no, sorry, we can't. We still can't cover you.
Wow.
You don't fit into a category that we can cover.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are days that I will go, like I said, to a client meeting. I sometimes have to travel for work, whether it's to do research or to meet with a potential client, because we understand, and we've long said in our business, that our number one competition is not another company, it's skepticism. We recognize that when we call someone and say,
Make them
hey, we
right.
found money for you, they're going to
Yeah.
think it's a scam.
Yeah.
So some people do want to meet in person, and obviously I have to weigh the cost of time and money to go meet
Right.
with someone.
Right.
But I've had plenty of times where I've flown wherever to meet with someone, so they can see I'm a real life person and they can trust me, and that I have the credentials and the experience, and what I'm talking about is real.
Right.
So sometimes my work is travel. Sometimes it's just, like I said, sitting in front of a computer and having some Zoom calls, whether it's for just reconnecting with referral partners or whatever. It's just a lot of not as much physical activity as you would think.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned referral partners. Do you find that's where a lot of your business comes from? Is from probate lawyers and other people in the law industry? Is that where a lot of your business comes from?
Yeah, a lot of probate lawyers, realtors, or real estate investors. Some are executors themselves who find us via our websites,
Right.
and they'll contact us to either to find missing heirs or to track down inheritance assets that they just don't know about.
Right. Okay. Um, sorry. So starting out, what were some of the challenges you faced? It was kind of a new industry for you. You weren't doing this. You started into something different. What were some of the challenges you faced? And I can assume one of them was, like you said, convincing people that hey, this shit is real. It's I'm not a prince from Saudi Arabia trying to unlock my bank account or whatever. So, what are some of the challenges you faced when you were starting out?
Yeah, so that was definitely a very big challenge. The other one was just like I said, going to a business or an industry where there was no template for us to follow.
Right.
But on
Yeah.
the other hand, that was actually something good because we weren't bound by someone else's idea of this is how you must do things.
Right.
So that definitely helped us. And I think it was also just the building a company. When I practiced law, I was a one-man operation. My one partner who also self-employed, he was also one-man operation. The other one was a teacher. So we didn't have the experience of building an organization.
Right.
We just it was a trial and error. I fortunately now we have a very stable team that has been with us for a number of years. But we had a lot of turnover for a few years of making either bad hiring decisions or sticking with people even though they were good hires for when we first got them, but then as the company grew and matured,
Right.
they weren't the people for the next stage. So fortunately, we've been able to really learn from that. It does help that I handed off the reins of the HR, including hiring, to my VP, who has a background in law and as well as HR.
Right.
So, which I was glad to let her do that.
And I was going to say, you just kind of answered the question there. You said you were glad because I know for a lot of entrepreneurs, right, when we start something, we're so used to doing everything. And sometimes it can be kind of tough to let go of a piece of it because a lot of us are of the mindset, well, you know what, if I want to do it and get it done right, I got to do it myself. And stopping the micromanaging, I guess, it can be tough, but it doesn't sound like you ran into that. You were kind of happy to let go of
It was a little tough. I mean, that was down the road after a number of years of having employees,
right.
but it was a little difficult at first. But I was soon able to do it. It was more the growing pain of how to delegate rather than whether to delegate
Right.
was a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of that growth mindset too, because I think if you want to move on to that next level, at some point you have to start delegating. You got to let go. You got to trust the people you've brought in around you to be able to make those decisions and feel confident in they're going to help the company get to where we want it to be. So
Right.
yeah. Okay. You're basically virtual. Everybody's working from home. What are some of the top technologies that you guys rely on in your business that you can't go without?
So, we're obviously we're up in the cloud. All our work is up in the cloud.
Right.
All our documents, everything we have is in the cloud. Obviously, Zoom has become a big part of the business. It's just being remote, and we work with people all over the country, in other places in the world. So just having a phone and Zoom are
Right.
big tools. I mean, a few hours ago, I got a message via LinkedIn. Someone just DM'd me out of the blue saying she's a real estate investor in San Diego and wanted to talk about my work, and can we talk? So we jumped on a Zoom call. It was just able to do 5 minutes, 5-10 minutes after we were messaging, we were having a Zoom call to talk about doing work together.
Right.
So those are really the big things, as basic as they sound.
Right. Now there must be some, I'm assuming, specialty tools, and we don't have to get into them, but I'm assuming, being able to find certain people in certain areas, there must be specialty tools for the
Right.
industry that you use.
Yeah. So there are a few website services that are aggregators of all data about people
Oh, okay.
that we have. We have to do a background check with them. We have to only use it for certain legal proper purposes to find someone. But when I'm doing it, if we look up someone, say missing heir, we can find all their past addresses. We can find, if we really wanted to dig in, if it really mattered to us, we could look up what car they own. Do they have any criminal infractions? Do they
Oh,
have
wow.
any IRS liens or stuff like that?
Right.
And then we also use other sources that have more archive stuff, like
Okay.
ancestry.com is a
Yeah.
big is
Yeah.
a resource of ours. News websites that have newspaper archives can be very big resources for us.
Right.
So And part of it is biggest tool though, I think, is just using our brains, using our curiosity and our analytical skills, and sometimes luck. Sometimes
Right.
luck can play a very big role in finding someone.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, can you possibly share maybe one of the toughest cases that you run into, that maybe you hit a dead end, or what, you just couldn't get any traction? You don't have to go into details, but I'm sure they're not all cut and dry and fairly easy. I'm assuming a lot of them are harder than they are easy.
Yeah, there are definitely some that are harder than others. Sometimes the finding the person is super easy, but convincing them that we're real and to sign with us can take months.
Right.
And sometimes it is very challenging, and it could take us months to crack through. And then all of a sudden, we find the person, and they sign the next day. So one that really sticks out in my mind was a case we had where a gentleman died he lived in a pretty seedy part of Detroit in the early 1980s, died in a house fire. And 20 years, 25, 30 years later, one of the big banks turned over $150,000 checking account that this guy had. And meanwhile, we found out that when the guy died, he was actually laying in the morgue for about a month before. He was Jewish, so one of the Jewish funeral homes came with, they have an agreement with the local county medical examiners that they know someone's Jewish and the body is not claimed, they'll
Yeah.
come so they can give it a proper burial.
Okay.
So we found out this guy had been there for about a month, but no known heirs, no one knew about him. We spent a lot of time. It turns out that he had changed his name. He was an
Wow.
immigrant from Russia, so he had Americanized his name. We found that he and his brother also changed his name, had done some prison time. I spent months and months finding him. We finally tracked down a sister who was still alive, living in Toronto, and I probably was working on this case for like 6 months to a year.
Wow.
Finally find her, we call her, and she uh, basically got the contact from us, and then started just snooping around and realized, that her brother had died however many years before, and that he had money, and she just went and got it herself. Uh,
Right.
so, obviously we're glad that the money got to the right person, but at the
Yeah.
same time, it was kind of frustrating. We put all this work, from in terms of research perspective, I say it's one of the best jobs I've ever done.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a little frustrating that I didn't get the payoff from it.
Right. Yeah. No, that would be tough, especially with immigrants who you said, came to the country, changed their name, right? Then you got siblings changing their name. Yeah, that that had to be that had to be a tough one for sure. So, knowing what you know now, and going down the path you've gone, would you have changed anything about how you started? Would you have done anything differently?
I don't think it would have changed how we started. I'd say the biggest lesson we learned was actually a few years into it. After we finally went full time, we started hiring employees. We were on this kind of mission to just be, the biggest, baddest company around,
Right.
and we were not as careful as we should have been in terms of saying, "But are we being smart in every case we take?" And we were taking on a lot of cases that in the end, we were either breaking even or losing money on, in terms of how much time and money we were investing into it.
Right.
And our revenue grew really strongly, but my partners and I were not taking home all that much money.
Right.
And one night I was in Oklahoma for work, and I just sit in a hotel room in rural Oklahoma, and I started just kind of pouring over the numbers, and I had that kind of, it's like that scene, I like, not I'm comparing myself to Tom Cruise, but it's that scene in Jerry Maguire where he's in his hotel room and he's sitting and he finally pounds out this manifesto about what the business should be.
Yeah.
And I kind of had that, and I said, guys, this is how we have to be. We have to be really rigid and very cold, for lack of a better term, in terms of what case we take and which we don't.
Right.
And that it took a little while to kind of turn the ship, but after a while we were able to do it, and it really made a major difference in the company.
Now it's got to be
So I guess
hard.
the moral of the story is bigger is not always better.
Right, absolutely. But it's got to be hard to, and maybe you've gained more knowledge on this, but to know how much time you're going to invest into something, because I guess until you start digging, how would you know if you're going to find an error in 3 days or 3 months? Like, is there some sort of tell
Um,
signs that
it,
you
it was
look
was
at?
it
And
was more a matter of starting out and saying, "Hey, we're not taking any cases where the amount that we're going to unite with people is below a certain dollar amount."
okay,
We just say, "Okay, if it's below X amount of dollars, we're just not taking it.
right,
It's we can't justify it anymore." And there are businesses uh, that are in our line of work with unclaimed property that have built a different business model where they're doing high volume, low dollar. They're giving out
right,
hundreds and hundreds of letters every day. That's just not how we're built. We're built more for the higher ticket
right,
items
right. Now,
where we're really going to dig in to find the people.
right. Now, do you find that you will utilize those other businesses to refer people to that you still obviously want to help, but like you say, from a business side, it doesn't make sense. Do you do kind of a referral to the competition, for lack of a better term? Like, will you send them and
Yeah,
say,
for the most part,
"Listen,
we're all pretty friendly with each other,
yeah,
and I'll send somebody to another competitor that I think will be a better fit in terms of whether it's the budget or whatever. If we get calls sometimes from attorneys who say they need to find an error, but simply just to give them notice, not to actually pay them an inheritance.
right,
That's just not our part of our business model. If we had the volume, we probably would do it, but
right,
to do one every few months where we're getting $100 here, $200, it's just not worth our while.
yeah,
So I'll just refer that out, and you know helps everybody else out. It's just not worth our while to do those cases. But
right."
I want to do the right thing and help them out and help out, a competitor or sometimes it'll be one of our investigators that will do it on the side and
Oh,
just
okay,
do as a kind of a do some moonlighting on it.
right, yeah. Now, how many employees do you have at Asset International?
We're 16 people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And you're spread throughout the U.S. Do you got people in other countries? How's that work?
So we do have some people overseas in the Middle East, and then we have the rest of our staff, other than me, that's here in the States, are all in Michigan.
Okay.
Basically, when COVID hit, obviously we everyone went sheltering at their homes,
Right. Yeah.
and then we found that we had actually our 2020 was probably our best year ever. Uh, nobody missed a beat. Everybody just did what they were supposed to do, and everybody's hitting their goals and their numbers. And we say, you know what? Let's not rock the boat. If everyone's happy, let's keep them happy.
Yeah.
And when our lease is up in a few months, we can cut our expenses by going to a much smaller office.
So I was going to ask that then. So you were actually did have a corporate office, and then pandemic hit, everybody went home, and you decided to stay virtual that way.
Yeah, we had an office. It is something I will admit I miss because we one of the things we worked on, and going back to the credibility thing, was having an office that someone wanted to come to us
Right.
and meet with us. They could see, they walk in, they see there's our logo on the wall.
Yeah.
We had testimonial letters from clients. We had our I think they call it, the ego wall, the brag wall, with like all the different news clippings that we would then have as glossy reprints, mounted on a nice, laminate board.
Right.
So we have all those,
Yeah.
and they're sitting in office now that nobody really goes to much anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
And
that's the reality of the post-COVID world.
right. Yeah. And there's something to be said too. Like, I know a lot of people, they may not realize it at the time, but there's something to be said about getting your ass out of bed in the morning, getting dressed, going to the office. Um, because when your office is, let's say, 12 steps from your bedroom, that's not much of a commute. There's not really that time to wind down and run through the day in your head, especially if you had a bad day. Sometimes that commute can help simmer the brain and get you into home mode, where I've spoke to a lot of people who say, yeah, shit, I need to go for a drive because I don't have that anymore. I walk to my office, which is in the basement or whatever it is. So,
Right.
and there's, like you say, there's that credibility part, and probably a pride part as well, as to, hey, this is our office, this is what we created, and where the magic happens, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's in terms of having that break, I work from home.
Yeah.
I generally speaking stop work by 5, 6 o'clock. I'll do the dishes, walk the dogs, whatever. And yeah, I might sit down for a half hour later in the evening before going to bed. I'm usually in bed by 10, 10:30.
Right.
So I'm usually not having that where I'm working straight until I just go, I'm exhausted and walk straight from my desk to my bed.
Right.
Uh, that's very rare for me.
Yeah.
I do have more somewhat conventional hours, even though I'm working from home. But I could see that being an issue for some people. I know when my first job as an attorney, I worked for a firm that was just a miserable, toxic workplace,
Right.
and I had a 45-minute commute, which in Metro Detroit is pretty far. And I grew up with both my parents having 5-minute commutes to the
Yeah.
office.
Yeah.
So for me, it was long, but I came to appreciate the drive home
Right.
because it let me decompress before I had to deal with. And this was before really. I mean, there were cell phones, but you didn't use them. You only use them in emergencies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and it let me decompress before I had to actually deal with other people.
Yeah, for sure. And and now on the flip side, if it was a toxic workplace, people don't have to go to that anymore. So there is kind of the pros and cons, I guess, to the post COVID era, where and I don't even know if we're out of it yet, but to where, yeah, some people have benefited and some people are getting hurt by it.
Yeah,
So
the funny thing for us was I had assumed I have kids who are now between ages 12 and 15.
okay.
But when COVID started, I always thought that it would be the people who had kids who could not wait to get back to the office, and the people who didn't have
Right.
kids would say, "Hey, I'm fine working from home," and it was actually the exact opposite.
Right.
People who had kids were like said, "No, I love working from home
Yeah.
because now because they didn't live right near the office, so they had to juggle driving their kids to school or picking them
Right.
up from school with being in the office, whereas they could drive the kids to school or from school and then come home and then get right back to work."
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the people who were single were like, "I got to get out of here. Like, I can't be cooped up here 24 hours a day."
Right.
So it was really counterintuitive, at least to my thinking.
Right. Now, you said the wife is also very entrepreneurial. Does she have her own business? Does she work from home, or is she out of the house?
No, she also works from home. She's always worked from home
Right.
for last whatever it is, 10 years, 10, 15 years. She is a weight loss and wellness and mindset coach.
Oh, so is my wife.
Oh, okay, we should
Yeah,
talk.
yeah, yeah. She works from home, and yeah, she does the exact same thing. So, and so what we find that works very well for us, both being very entrepreneurial, doing our own thing, sitting in our own office, which is kind of beside each other, but we have a hard cutoff, like you said. You have a cutoff. Your day ends, 5, 6, whatever it is. We do the same thing, and we find that for us, you get so wrapped up in what you're doing, sometimes you forget that relationship part, and so we have had a hard rule that every night, regardless of what we're doing, 9:30 p.m. we meet on the couch,
Mhm.
and it's date night, right? So we'll chat a little bit, watch a show, go to bed, and start the cycle all over again. So
That's great. Yeah.
but you have to, yeah, when you work from home, you kind of have to have that separation, because it's too easy to keep working, right? Like you say,
Yeah.
it's too easy to have some dinner, get the dishes done, and say, okay, you know what, I'm just going to send out another email, or I'm just going to do something
Yeah.
else, and yeah, you find that you probably put more work in from your home office than you ever did from the corporate office.
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So talk to me a little bit. I might have some listeners who, and just the generic PI side of things. How tough of an industry is that to get into?
Um, I mean, again, it's hard for me to say because I'm really not in the quote PI
Right.
community.
Right.
I'm much more in the say probate community of hanging out with probate attorneys than I am with other PIs.
Right.
So um,
But did you have to become like? Are you a licensed PI then?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
licensed in about 8 to 10 different states.
Okay. So how tough is that? How big of a deal
So
is
in
that to
terms of
become?
becoming a PI, it really depends on the states. In some states, there's no exam, but in every state you have to pass a background exam. They do have certain objective criteria in terms of you have a certain age, you can't have certain crimes on your record,
Right.
or if you do, you have to at least been a certain number of years. You can't have a dishonorable discharge from the military. A lot of states you have to work for another PI or as a police officer or in some other under somebody else's auspices.
Right.
So I got mine because in Michigan, they also actually let me back up. Some states say that you can qualify for a PI exam if you or license if you have certain educational requirements, usually a criminal justice degree from an accredited college.
Okay.
So the state of Michigan, which is where I'm based, ostensibly, and
Yeah.
where I was until 2 years ago, they changed the law however many years ago, that if you have a degree from an accredited law school, that exempts you from the work requirements, that you can
Okay.
just basically immediately apply. So I got my PI license, and then I was able to then get, after a certain number of years, I was able to get reciprocity for other states. Now, some states also do have an exam that you must pass in order to become a PI. Like I said, I'm studying for one right now, which is a very difficult exam,
Right.
and hopefully I'll pass it.
Now,
It's in a few
sorry,
weeks.
sorry to interrupt. Is this for a state that you currently aren't in, where you're finding you need to be able to access?
Right.
Okay.
So there's certain states that in order to do work in those states, specifically in those states, we need a license.
Okay.
So yeah,
Right.
it's 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 gonna be challenging. I'm a generally good test taker, but this one was written. This exam, from what I understand, was written by someone who's neither a PI, is actually not a PI, so therefore, kind of like was given materials and told, "You're a professional test writer. You should write
Right.
this test."
Right.
So
Yeah.
it asks some things that are, I would say not really necessary for someone to know as a PI.
Right. And you can always tell those ones that are written by people like that because, you write the test, you do the exams, whatever, and then you find out, yeah, that has absolutely nothing to do with the industry that I'm going into, right? It looked good on paper. It was a good question on paper, but it's not really even
I
relevant
mean, like
to.
there's a question about the name of the court decision. You have to maybe know, for example, one rule that does apply for PIs. You have to know the year the U.S. Supreme Court decided that rule. But
Okay.
I could tell you, both as a lawyer and PI, no one ever says, "Wait, before you invoke that rule, you tell me what year the Supreme Court
Yeah.
gave it."
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous thing, but
Right.
whatever, you got to play the game.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of those knowledge-based questions that you'll keep in your back pocket for Jeopardy or something like that, right?
Exactly.
That's my oldest son. He's just like that. He's got all this, we call it useless knowledge that yeah, it's going to win you money on a game show, but you'll never use it in real life.
Exactly.
So where did you get your law degree then? In Michigan?
No, actually, I went to Cardozo Law School. It's part of Yeshiva University in New York City.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
So it's most known for Barry Scheck, who was on the O.J. Simpson Dream
Right.
Team.
Yeah.
He was the one who did all the DNA evidence, and he founded the whole Innocence Project
Right.
movement, which helps exonerate people who've been wrongly convicted.
Yeah.
So I was very fortunate when I was in law school to take some classes with him.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Okay, so let's back way up and talk about you and you as a kid, as a child. You grew up in Detroit. Is
In
that
the
correct?
suburbs, yeah.
In the suburbs of
Yeah.
Detroit. Um, what did you want to be growing up? As a kid, growing up in Detroit, what kind of aspirations did you have?
I want to be Detroit Tiger, of course.
Of course. Yeah, and how'd that work out for you?
I was missing one small part of being a baseball player, which was the athletic talent.
Right.
Um, that was obviously, like most boys, my professional baseball player. As
Yeah.
I got a little older, got into high school, actually, my dream was to be I really wanted to own a record store.
Oh, really?
I've always been a big music fan.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I used to love hanging out at record stores, just looking at the LPs. Um, but obviously it's not something you're going to make a lot of money in.
Right.
Um, and being from a middle to upper middle class Jewish suburban home, you went to do the responsible thing, like go to law school or be an accountant, and accountant was
Right.
not my cup of tea, so it was law school.
Yeah.
And I was not good at science, so that ruled out medical school.
Right. And no aspirations. So you said your father was an accountant, is that correct?
He still is, yes,
Yeah.
87 and still CPA.
Wow. And what about mom?
So mom's retired. She was stay at home until basically I'm the youngest till I got into high school.
Okay.
And then she became a travel agent and opened a travel agency.
Oh, okay. Cool.
So,
S-
but obviously that's an industry that has suffered a
Yeah.
lot starting with the internet.
Yeah, right. And not only the internet, but COVID really as well, right? There was
Well,
nobody
COVID
traveling.
was the nail in the coffin for a lot of them that were still around. But
Right.
it used to be that the airlines took very good care of the travel agents, gave a lot of commissions and whatever. And then when internet came and everyone was able to book their stuff
Booked
online,
directly. Right.
the airlines said, "We're not paying you commissions anymore."
Yeah.
That was a big issue.
Yeah. Right. Huh. So one thing I know about, entrepreneurs is they're usually very routine based. Are you a routine type of guy? Do you, follow a very strict, I get up in the morning, such and such a time, I eat a certain breakfast, I do this, I do that, and get on with my day? Or do you just kind of, well, whatever happens, happens?
No, I definitely have become a very big fan in the last number of years of routine and habits.
Right.
Um, for example, I always pick out my clothes the night before that I'm going to wear.
Right.
Even though I wear t-shirts and jeans or shorts most
Yeah.
days,
Yeah.
I still pick out everything the night before because it's just one less thing I have to think about in the morning.
Right.
I'm a big believer in that concept of you want to eliminate as many decisions early in the morning as
Right.
possible to
Right.
let your brain just gradually warm up. Definitely have my routine in terms of what time I get up, what I do in the morning, what I eat or drink, and when I eat and drink during the
Yeah.
day. My routine definitely has some semblance to it. Obviously, there are days that I just don't have that control over it. Someone
Right.
schedules a call with me, or I got to travel or whatever, and it's I can roll with the punches, but
Yeah.
I'm definitely more productive when I have that routine.
Right. And having a 13 and 15-year-old, I'm sure they can break up your routine a little bit as well.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, well, I actually also have a 12-year-old,
Oh, okay.
and they don't bother, they don't interfere too much. They're for better or for worse. They like their devices, shall we say?
Right. Yeah.
Um, so that's a challenge for us.
Right, right. So, what do you do? And I don't know if your industry faces a lot of stress. I'm sure there's got to be days where well pulling your hair out, so to speak, same as same as me. But what do you do for handling stress? Do you have anything specific? Do you work out? Do you practice yoga? Do you meditate? Is there anything that you do?
So prayer is a big part of my life.
Right.
So that definitely keeps me grounded and gives me perspective. Also, as I mentioned before, the financial troubles that our business had. So there was some really tough times for us financially on a personal level.
Yeah.
My wife had a business that had gone under, so there was the kind of double whammy of my income had dropped and her business had gone under, leaving us with a lot of debt, and it was a very very stressful time. So the bar became very high for me after getting through that. The bar for being stressed out went very high.
Right.
Uh,
And,
so yeah,
yeah. And
between the faith and the experience, I
yeah.
it takes a lot more to stress me out.
Right, right. No, that's good. Now, I know you mentioned that you're a big music aficionado. What type of music are you into, or is it kind of go across different genres?
All genres. I mean, I'd say country and classic rock are definitely my top two.
Right.
But right before I got on the call, I was listening to some 80s new wave, listening to classic rock before. It's all over the place. I'm
Right.
actually going to a conference in Nashville in a few weeks, and the organization is doing a big dinner at the Country Music Hall of Fame, which I am
Oh, cool.
so super geeked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
mean,
you've
I've been there, but to go there and like just be able to hang out and is super exciting for me.
Yeah, and I'm the same actually. You know, I grew up on classic rock, obviously, but it was probably I don't know last 5 6 years I've really become a very strong country boy. You
Mhm.
know, loving my country music, but I also know you have another hobby, and it's collecting college T-shirts. Is that right?
Yes. So so I'm wearing my newest one right now. It's the Indian River State College
Okay.
uh, that I picked up the other day. I was driving down to visit my parents in Boca Raton, and I saw the sign. I was like, "Yeah, let me stop there and get a T-shirt." So, yeah, I collect them. I buy them in my travels. Sometimes friends just say, "Hey, you know, do you have this shirt?" And they'll buy me and send me one.
Right.
So,
And
which is
and,
nice.
and what spurred that? What got you interested in college
I'm
T-shirts?
not sure why. I think I wasn't collecting anything, and I was like, yeah, that'd be a nice little moment. I think part of it was I was traveling more for work, and I was like, you know what? It's so. I think a friend of mine had said that it's always good to have when you go on business trips where
Yeah.
they're not all that fun to have something that you can look back on and remember. So I just started collecting them, and it kind of took on a life of its own.
Right. Yeah, my son and I actually we do the same thing. You know, I'm in Canada, but my son is a football kid, and he's playing in Jersey right now. He goes
Wait,
to school.
which football?
Uh, uh, well, he plays NFL
Okay.
rules,
Oh, yeah.
so
Okay.
American football. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. He's going to school in Jersey. Um,
Where's he go to
so
school?
he goes to the Petty School in Hightstown.
Okay.
It's a private school in Jersey.
Okay.
So, but we travel a lot through the summer to different showcases and that. So we started actually buying, you know, jerseys or T-shirts of whatever college football team
Mhm.
belong to that state. So that's something we kind of have started ourselves. And then the wife is a big coffee cup collector, so we normally try and get her a coffee. We got
Yeah.
more damn coffee cups than we do actually, you know, drinking
Yeah,
glasses in
we
the house.
also have a lot of coffee cups, especially my wife collects the Starbucks collectible ones.
Oh,
And
okay.
the joke is we don't even drink. I mean, we're tea drinkers, but even that we have so many more mugs than we could ever use.
Oh, I know. Yeah, my son keeps telling her she has to start weeding some out. So we got to buy
Yeah.
some you know shelves to start putting them on. So, um, what do you do for personal development? Like outside the office, you know, what do you do to keep yourself entertained or however you want to put it? What's important to you for development?
Um, I think just having time to think. I'm a big podcast listener,
Right.
so I like to. Some I listen to just for entertainment or for keep up on the news, but also there are some I listen to as personal development. Big reader, so that definitely helps.
Yeah.
And part of it's just a lot of the time my quote free time is with the family.
Right. Yeah. Cool. You got favorite author? What kind of stuff do you like to read?
I so in terms of non-business reading, I'd say almost always alternate between fiction, nonfiction. I literally just bounce back and
Right.
forth. So I like biographies. In terms of fiction, John Grisham, David Baldacci,
Right.
that genre. Um, but I like reading just biographies or about different events. I read a book last year. It sounds kind of morbid about the Jonestown massacre,
Okay. Yeah.
which was a fascinating read. So just whatever. I just go to library, I browse, or if I read a book review in the Wall Street Journal, whatever, and they say it's a good book, I'll put it on my Goodreads to read list, and
Yeah.
eventually I'll get to it. In terms of business reading, I'd say Jim Collins is definitely my number one.
Okay.
Good to Great is just still for me the gold standard for books. I'd say other really good business books or leadership books. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink is a great book. The Pumpkin Patch by Mike Michalowicz, which is
Okay.
a
Yeah.
very well-known book,
Right.
is a fun read, but really kind of distills down in terms of cultivating a client base is really good. Yeah, just I'm kind of all over the place, like my
Right.
music.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Um, I ask this of all my guests is what is your why? You know, when things get tough, they always say, you know, especially as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, you got to have a strong why behind you to keep you going through those tough times, through those very stressful times when, you know, either clients aren't knocking on the door or, you know, you're spending more money than you're making. What keeps you driven?
So part of it, I'll tell you, is that I think back to Danny Bonaducci, if you
Yeah, yeah,
remember him.
yeah,
So he at one point, he had a really low point in his life where he was literally homeless. He was living in his car, and then he made a comeback, and he had a I think you want to say he had a morning show in Detroit and an afternoon show in Chicago. He's literally commuting back and forth every day.
wow,
And someone said, "Why are you doing this?" He says, because I never want to have to worry that I go back to sleeping in my car. So part of my why is simply having been in a very tough spot, never wanting to ever go back there,
right,
to make sure that I'm providing for my family. But I also really enjoy the work. Uh, I I'm a big fan of, first of all, connecting. I like connecting the dots. I like solving puzzles, but I also like the idea of that I'm connecting people with their money. I have a fairly strong libertarian streak, so the idea of, especially if the money's sitting in government treasury, of getting the money from the government and putting it into
yeah,
people's
right,
hands,
yeah,
playing. I would say Robin Hood because it's their money.
right,
So that's just really what it comes down to.
yeah. Oh, that's awesome. What does success look like for not only Michael Zwick, but your company? When can you say, "Yep, we've done it. We are where we aim to be."
Tell you the truth, I really don't have an end sight.
No,
I think wherever we go, I'll probably still want to keep growing. The idea of hitting a plateau and going, okay, I'm happy with this amount, which is not to say that I will be unhappy
right.
with a good result, but I think as an entrepreneur, I just think the idea of saying I've reached this
A
goal.
ceiling, right?
Now, yes, there could be that point where I reach a goal, and as age and whatever else comes into play, and I go, you know what? Okay, great, I can sell the business and go off into the sunset.
Yeah,
But at the same time, in terms of, as long as I'm working and growing the company, I'll always want to keep growing it.
absolutely. Yeah, and that's usually the answer I hear. You know, you hear, yes, I want to be able to serve my clients, as you said, right? You want to get the money out of the hands of the government and give it to the people who, you know, have it coming. So that's got to be, you know, a successful end for the business is being able to do that. But yeah, that continuous growth mindset. It's hard to say, okay, once I hit this point, that's it,
Yeah.
because then
I
it's
mean,
kind of like,
yeah, I
what's
mean, I look at
next?
my father, like I said, is 87 years old, still works full time as a CPA,
Wow.
and he loves it.
Yeah.
And what the funniest, the not as funniest, but also the, like, one of the most admirable things is that my father doesn't just love the work. He is the consummate schmoozer. We always joke there are two people in this world: those who Jack Swick knows and those he just doesn't know yet.
Right.
Um, and he still has that thrill of the chase of landing a new client.
That's
Like
awesome.
you could see, like he still gets excited when he's talking about how he just landed this new client. So it's, I still have that also. It's always about, okay, like, can we get more? Can we get more?
Right.
Again,
Yeah.
not that I'm unhappy with what I have,
No, but
um, but and not that I'm not appreciative of what I have, but I just the instinct is to keep growing, wanting to build more.
right. No, that's awesome. And obviously you have that, you know, shown to you. Father hasn't stopped, you know, why would son sort of thing, right? Because
Mhm.
you see
Right.
that excitement, like the fire still burns inside him at 87 years old. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, so listen, you know, before we start to wrap things up, is there anything about what you do, the company, that, you know, maybe I didn't ask, that you kind of want to get across to people to let them know, you know, what you're about? Is there anything that I haven't asked you?
So one area we haven't really touched on is we do have another division that will do asset finding.
Okay.
So, for example, handling a case right now where a guy died just about 2 weeks ago in New York City, and his girlfriend the last number of years is going to be the executor, and but she doesn't know anything about what he owned.
Right.
So she and his children have hired us to, like I said, to find the assets, determine what it is they own, and then also do all the legwork to get that. So that's as niche as finding missing heirs is. The actual the finding doing the asset finding is actually even more niche than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
As far as I know, we're really the only ones doing that. So we're that's kind of in it's a smaller, more younger stage that we're building out.
Right. Okay. And do you find that part of it is tougher than finding heirs? I would have to assume it is because how would you know, have any idea of what somebody owns or what they've hidden or where things might be?
So that comes from our having been doing unclaimed property work for all these years, is we're seeing we see the common assets that someone leaves behind that falls through the cracks.
Okay.
And we also, fortunately, not so much me, but my team has developed a very strong, underappreciated skill of dealing with bureaucracy, of how to talk to bureaucrats, how to cut through the red tape, also how to be patient, which is not my
Right.
strong suit.
Right.
Um, but it's something that we know how to negotiate and through those channels. So it's which is not to say that we know we are always getting everything, but when we take on a case, we'll do a interview to get to know something about the deceased, so that will often tell us things about where they might have assets, whether it's a retirement account or bank account or something like that.
Right.
So, and then we start kind of pulling at the thread and seeing what unravels.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Huh. So if people want to know more, how can they reach out to you?
So that we have our assetsinternational.com
Okay.
is our main website. The other business that I've just mentioned is inheritmore.com.
Okay.
And everyone can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find. I guess I was on early enough that I was able to get the linkedin.com/Michael Zwick, I think it is.
Right.
Well, why don't we look real quick to make sure before you quote me on that. Yes, I am linkedin.com/in/Michael
Right.
Zwick. But I'm pretty easy to find. And then, anyone can feel free to reach out to me on there. I'm pretty active on there. I post pretty much every weekday.
Okay.
I try to make things entertaining and engaging. The fact that I'm dealing with death and inheritance, I like thinking I keep things kind of
On the
light
lighter side,
and
right.
entertaining while also being educational.
Right. Oh, that's awesome. And those links you mentioned, I will be putting them up on the website
Great, thank
that
you.
people can connect with you. So, listen, Michael, this has been great chatting with you. I learned a lot. Now, one thing I did want to ask: people from other countries can connect with you. You'll work for, let's say, a Canadian,
Absolutely,
somebody from
yes.
Australia or wherever they may be contacting you
Yeah,
from.
we've located people in I don't know how many dozens of different countries at this point.
Perfect.
And to the extent that we need resources on the ground, if we can't do it ourselves, we do know, like I said, colleagues in other countries that we can work with,
Right.
and collaborate with on cases. So that's not
Yeah.
a problem.
Perfect. Okay. Well, listen, before we wrap it up, I like to leave my listeners with what I call the golden nugget. It's just kind of a thinking point for them. So, listen, legends, a lot of times when we're looking at starting our own business, we think it has to be something huge. We think, you know what, I need to make a big presence. I need to make this big splash in the pond. I need to be like Michael had said. We need to be the number one. We have to be the top dog sort of thing in the industry. And if you approach your journey with, if I can put one drop in the pond doesn't sound like a lot, but it's the ripple effect that happens after that drop lands in the pond that can make such a difference. That one ripple turns into a second ripple, touches another person, then they put a drop in the pond and it just, it makes a wave. So don't be afraid of starting small. You don't have to throw that big boulder in, just put a drop in, and you're going to notice that it's going to put you on your journey. So, with that being said, go out there, continue pushing forward, and continue becoming that legend you know you're destined to be. We'll chat again soon. Take care. And Michael, thanks for being a part of the show.
Thank you.